Hello students. Today in this lecture we are going to see Metamorphoses Book 3, and today we'll read the story of Pentheus and Bacchus part 1, and then the story of Acoetes or Acoetes, and then again at the end of this lecture we'll be covering up or winding up the story with the story of Pentheus and Bacchus part 2. Now, to understand who Pentheus was first, Pentheus was king of Thebes, and his father's name was Aeson. His mother's name was Agave, who was daughter of Cadmus. So this makes it clear that who was Pentheus. Now, Bacchus, we have been already introduced about Bacchus or who he was in the story of Samuel. Ovid tells us that Bacchus was an unborn child who was extracted from her womb and implanted in Jupiter's thigh. So when the time rolls around, that's where it's born from. The child ends up being Bacchus, the god of wine. Now Ovid begins the story and says that sad the story is, it definitely increases Tiresias' reputation as a seer. So here we have already seen that how Tiresias was gaining his reputation as a very powerful prophet or a seer. Ovid begins here. Once this story was bruited abroad, Tiresias' credit spread through the townships of Greece as a prophet of high reputation. One single person, however, was found to reject him, and it was Pentheus. Pentheus could not or never wanted to recognize Bacchus as God, and he never believed in the stories of Tiresias' prophecies also. Here, especially we find that when Tiresias makes a prediction about Pentheus, he calls him blind. Here Ovid writes thus, "You blind old fool," he cruelly taunted, "lost in the dark, then shaking his lost white locks." Tiresias answered the king, "How lucky you'd be if you were deprived like me of your sight and could never set eyes on the mysteries of Bacchus." That means if you had been blind like me, then obviously you would never see the mysteries of Bacchus. But obviously you have eyes and you'll be able to see the mysteries of Bacchus. That means it is a sort of prophecy which is made by Tiresias about the future of Pentheus. Now here Tiresias prophesies that Pentheus must honor Bacchus or he will be ripped limb from limb just for respecting Bacchus. When after some time, like shortly afterwards, the god Bacchus comes to the town of Thebes, and all the men of the town instantly sign themselves as a frantic devotees of the god. They all start celebrating his arrival and enjoy the festivities in name of god Bacchus, participating in wild, chaotic festivities. Now here, when Pentheus sees all of them celebrating like this, he just tries to remind them that who actually they are. I mean the people of Thebes. He says, "The serpent died for a pool and a fountain. You are defending your own good name. Defend it and conquer. The dragon's part was to kill brave settlers. Yours is to banish effeminate eunuchs and save your inherited honor." So these are the words of Pentheus, where he is trying to awaken his own men from this frantic celebration in the name of god Bacchus. So Pentheus doesn't like this one bit. He orders his men to go capture Bacchus and bring him back in chains. His grandfather Cadmus and others try to dissuade or deter him. They just try to stop him, but it is all in vain because he is determined. I mean, he is more determined to capture Bacchus. But obviously, that stopping or that dissuading doesn't work on Pentheus, and he sends his men to bring Bacchus in chains. So finally, his men go off and come back a short time later with a prisoner, but it is not Bacchus. Instead, it is Acoetes or Acoetes. Now here we begin with the story of the Acoetes and the Lydian sailors. The story goes off as instead of the captive claims to be called Acoetes or Acoetes, Acoetes now tells his own story. Now when he is asked by Pentheus that who he is or what his name is, he coolly looks into the eyes of Pentheus without any fear. Cool and fear. Here he says, Ovid says, "Cool and fearless, the stranger replied, 'My name is Acoetes. My country, Ionia. My parents were humble and simple folk. My father left me no fields to be ploughed by sturdy oxen, flocks of sheep to yield wool, or herds of cattle for farming. Poor like me, he would use his angler's line and hook to entice the fish and land his catch as it danced on the rod. So these are the words of Acoetes, where he accepts or says that he is from a very humble background. So here he says that he is a sailor, the son of a poor fisherman. One day when he and his men landed on the coast of Chios, they found a young boy on the shore and took him captive without recognizing who actually he was. Something told Acoetes that the boy was a god in disguise. As we have seen throughout the Metamorphoses or this epic, we know that most of the time these gods are moving around in disguise. So something told Acoetes that this boy, though he is appearing to be boy, is actually a god in disguise. He prayed to the boy to forgive them for capturing him. But then the other sailors started laughing and told Acoetes to knock it off. That means they could not believe the story which is told by Acoetes about the boy. Or they were not, like, Acoetes tried and failed to get them to see his reason, though he was trying to give them the reason, but they could not see the reason which was given by Acoetes. So afterwards the boy, who was in fact the god Bacchus, told them he wanted to be dropped to the island of Naxos. So the crew tried to convince Acoetes that Acoetes, who was manning the tiller or the wheel of the ship, to sail the other way. That means instead of going to Naxos, they should go to the other way. Here Acoetes tries to convince them to follow or do what is told by this young boy, but they don't listen to Acoetes. So meanwhile he says that eventually, however, Bacchus got tired of leading everyone along and revealed his true identity. That means he tried to convince them the way he was in the disguise of a small boy, but nobody listened to what exactly he was trying to say. So finally he had to come to his real self, revealing his own identity or the real identity. Then he made the ship stand still in mid-sea and wreathed all its mast with grape vines. At the same time, he transformed all of the crewmen into dolphins, all except Acoetes. Here Ovid says that meanwhile, this narration is being done by Acoetes. Meanwhile, I had long been whipping myself, but my evil companions laughed at my tears and quickened the stroke as they bent to their oars. And I swear to you, sir, by the God himself, no other God is more present than he is. Here he is talking about Bacchus. The story you hear from my lips is true as it beggars belief. The vessel then stood stock still. He is talking about the ship, which were not at all moving in between or in the middle of the ocean. They were standing still as if they were standing in the dry dockyard. He further says, in the surge and swell of the waves, as though it were resting in dry dock. So the ship stops moving in the middle of the ocean as if it was stopping or standing in the dry dock. So that's the story, or that's the end of the story of the Acoetes. But as we know that Pantheus is too prudent or too proud to believe any story about Bacchus, and he does not even want to believe the prophecy which is made by Tiresias. Now when finally Acoetes has narrated the story, Pentheus goes on and says that I don't at all believe the story which has been narrated by you. Now he says that he is unimpressed by the story of Acoetes and says that Pentheus broke in. I have listened for long enough to this rambling saga. By playing for time, he is hoping to soften my anger. That means he is using this time to soften my anger, which obviously is in vain, because I am not going to soften my anger. I am going to be as aggressive as I am against this god called Bacchus. Now, and while the men are preparing the cruel instruments, iron and fire, for his execution of Acoetes, the story goes that as if by magic, the doors flew open and the shackle dropped from the prisoner's arms on their own accord. Now Pentheus, as we said, is not impressed by the story of Acoetes, and he orders his men to cart Acoetes off to prison and torture him to death. But what he doesn't know is that once they get there, the doors mysteriously burst open and the chains slip off Acoetes, letting him escape. And all this mystery or miracle is created by Bacchus. Now Pentheus' most ignorant act comes next, when he climbs the mountains to see what women are doing in their crazy parties in honor of Bacchus, or in that festivity which is made or which is created or which is celebrated in the name of Bacchus. Now all he could show was the wounded stumps of his sundered limbs. Finally, he goes there to see what exactly is happening. But when he goes there, Agave, who is his mother, and his sister presume him to be Acoetes, or the ghost of Acoetes. Now when he gets there, his mother catches sight of him. Unfortunately, she has been driven into a prison, and then she mistake him for a wild boar. She presume him to be a ghost coming in that shape of boar. Now Agave leads the other woman in charge against her son. That means she is charging against her own son, and in that frenzy she forgets that what she exactly is doing. All he could show was the wounded stumps of his sundered limbs. Here it is being spoken about Pentheus, as he yelled out, "Look at me, mother." He is trying to call out his mother to show him that it is actually Pentheus, her own son. But Agave is too drawn in that festivity that she is not able to recognize her own son. And then Agave, streaked at him, uttered a wild shriek out, violently shaking the neck and tossing her hair, then twisted his head right off, displaying it high in her blood-drenched fingers. She shouted, "Joy, my companions, victory is ours." So saying this, she broke the head of Pantheus. So Agave leaves other women in charge against her son. Then when they catch him, they tear him limb to limb, as was the prophecy of Tiresias. Now Agave deals the death blow when she wrenches his head off, and it is finally Agave who kills her own son. So this is the story of Pentheus and Bacchus, and as it is in this lecture. Thank you all.